The Radium Girls, MRS 367, Radiation Biology, Protection and Dosimetry, Sean Wilson, student number 11708-309. The Radium Girls incident was a murky chapter in the history of ionizing radiation occurring roughly between 1910 to 1930 throughout America and Europe, where young women were employed as watch-dial painters using radioluminescent paint laced with radioactive radium. The young women were instructed to use a technique called lip pointing, in which they would put the tips of their paintbrushes between their lips to achieve a fine point for detailed and neat work, therefore ingesting a small dose of radium each time. Some women would also paint their lips, teeth and fingernails with the radioluminescent paint. It is estimated that the women would ingest 4,000 micrograms of radium every 6 months. This led to a multitude of health problems, including blood disorders, necrosis, jaw infections, and sarcomas, to name a few, resulting from the radium poisoning. In addition, most women endured one reappearing health condition. Their teeth would fall out, or they would suffer necrosis of the jaw, thus termed the radium jaw. The radioluminescent paint was also used on house numbers, light switches, doll's eyes, and instrument dials in tanks, ships, planes, and other military machinery. The most prolific cases occurred in the United States involving the United States Radium Corporation, where 5 women sued the United States Radium Corporation, leading to health reforms, occupational and employment rights, and legislative and government regulations. In 1925, the 5 young women started their attempts to gain compensation and spent upwards of 2 years searching for an attorney that would represent them and take on the case against the United States Radium Corporation. The court case began in 1928, although 2 women were bedridden and incapacitated due to radium poisoning by this stage. Nevertheless, the women reached an out-of-court settlement of $10,000 each, significantly less than the fair compensation they were after. Tragically, within a decade, the 5 women suing the United States Radium Corporation were deceased. Many issues arose surrounding the use of radium and radium-laced paint in the early 1900s. Radium was discovered by Marie and Pierre Curie in 1898, resulting in not much known about radium and the damage it can cause to human biology. Thus, we have tragic stories such as the Radium Girls. The young women working at the United States Radium Corporation factories were unaware of the detrimental health impacts that could arise from coming into contact with radium, let alone ingesting it. At the time, radium was advertised as offering numerous health benefits. It was added to everyday products such as facial creams, toothpaste, and some food-grade items such as water. Even some medicines contain radium. Misinformation was spread through various media outlets and manufacturing companies regarding the benefits of radium, which steered the public perception of people believing radium was a safe and beneficial product. The United States Radium Corporation had their issue of prioritizing profits over the health of their employees and the general public. One of the first women to complain about health problems associated with radium and working at the United States Radium Corporation was seen by a specialist who deemed her fine, and her problems could not be ascribed to working at the United States Radium Corporation. It was later found that the specialist was not a medical professional, but it was a toxicologist employed by the United States Radium Corporation. This proves the United States Radium Corporation was trying to cover up the health problems multiple workers were starting to develop. Also, the United States Radium Corporation tried to discredit the women by involving themselves in a dishonest propaganda campaign, claiming the symptoms were likely syphilis. However, all the affected women had teeth falling out and other issues such as anemia, bone fractures, jaw infections, and sarcomas, therefore disproving the claims the United States Radium Corporation was making. The lack of safety culture amongst the factories and the concern for the welfare of the workers was an issue that plagued the dial painting industry. The dial painting factories, in particular the United States Radium Corporation, failed their duty of care to its workers to protect them from the hazardous radioactive substance radium. The cause of the Radium Girls incident comes down to negligence on behalf of the dial painting factories and the product being used not being classed as a hazardous substance. The workers were then unaware that the product they were using every day was lethal and will leave many of them with horrific side effects and for many cause death. The implications of the Radium Girls case led to government and occupational regulations, workers' rights movements, and the creation of the Occupational Health and Safety Administration in the United States. If factors like these were in place, this incident could have been prevented, although it did lead to future directions and reforms for all workers. Radium is mainly an alpha particle emitter, although it also emits both beta particles and gamma rays. As alpha particles cannot penetrate the skin and beta particles can only slightly penetrate the skin, it made the dial painters more susceptible to severe radiation poisoning due to the ingesting of the radium. Thus, both alpha and beta particles are lethal once inside the human body. Furthermore, as radium has a half-life of 1,600 years, once deposited throughout the body, it was impossible to eradicate it from the body entirely and caused a multitude of health problems and death. Radium has similar chemical properties to calcium. They are both alkaline earth metals. They are described as bone seekers. Calcium deposits in bones and teeth to increase strength and support their growth, structure, and hardness, whereas radium destroys bones and teeth and reduces bone growth. This was evident in the Radium Girls case, as they suffered from their teeth falling out and the necrosis of the jaw. Their jaws were described as appearing moth-eaten. There are also reports of bones breaking while moving in bed or walking, and the bones in their legs shortening. The graph represents the radium dose to the skeleton in greys, responding with the increasing likelihood of acquiring bone cancers. Radiation dose-response relationships are shown through the use of mathematics or graphs. They will always consist of two properties. They'll either be linear or non-linear, and either threshold or non-threshold. Radiation dose responses experienced by humans can be deterministic or stochastic. The Radium Girls experienced stochastic responses due to ingesting low doses of radium that produced radium-induced health defects over time, such as bone and lung cancers. Stochastic radiation responses are linear, non-threshold types, meaning even the smallest dose will eventually produce a response, for example, cancers, tumours, and genetic defects. This is represented by letters A and B in the graph on the right-hand side. Through studies by the Centre for Human Biology at Argonne National Laboratory, found that the dial painters who developed malignancies had received a threshold dose 1,000 times above natural levels. Below this level, no malignancies were reported to be found. The Radium Girls case provided a monumental shift in the study and understanding of radiation physics. It was influential in developing the idea of dose and quantitative measurements of radiation exposure in the radiology profession, therefore providing enhanced safety and dose reduction throughout emerging radiologic modalities. The effect radiation has on tissues has been divided into categories influenced by the time it takes for the tissues to be impaired by radiation exposure. These are acute responses and late responses. Acute responses generally happen within a few weeks of exposure, and late responses can take months or years to become evident, as visualized in the graph. Acute responses produce deterministic effects, and late responses can produce both deterministic and stochastic effects. The Radium Girls suffered from the late effects of radiation exposure. Over varied lengths of time, they would suffer from sarcomas, cancers, necrosis, and ultimately for some, death. In addition, many of the surviving Radium Girls experienced late response complications at scattered stages throughout their lives. The target theory results in radiation damage through direct type damage and indirect damage. Direct type damage disrupts the molecular structure by hitting the target molecule inside the nucleus directly. In contrast, indirect damage occurs when radiation affects the molecular environment around the target molecule, resulting in an interaction. The target molecule is an area within a cell that is the most radiosensitive, which when hit, cell death can occur. It is impossible to determine whether the cell damage is caused by a direct hit or an indirect hit. The Radium Girls suffered cell damage often as an indirect hit. The radium was spread through water after being ingested, indirectly damaging the target molecule and causing cell death throughout the body. Implementing general safety protocols such as wearing personal protective equipment would have been a simple solution to minimizing some of the issues the Radium Girls endured and suffered. Manufacturing companies that produced the radioluminescent paint and employed factory workers to paint with the product were enforced to increase their radiation safety and protection due to the Radium Girls case. Much harm could have been prevented if safety procedures like this were in place. Factory workers would be made to use personal protective equipment and the lip pointing technique was abolished. Radioluminescent paint manufacturers would start to phase out the use of radium and introduce elements with lower activity such as promethium, tritium, and strontium. In the 1960s, the use of radium and other radioactive elements had been ceased for industrial use. Occupational safety should have been a paramount objective for the United States government prior to the Radium Girls case. It was unfortunate that a tragedy like this was required to force fair and safe workplaces to the forefront of political conversation. However, the Radium Girls case did lead to occupational safety standards being introduced in workplaces and the establishment of life-saving regulations, eventually being pivotal to the creation of the Occupational Safety and Health Administration in the United States. The case was influential in the labour rights movement and initiating precedent to be able to sue employers for labour abuses. Thorough research should have been mandatory to use toxic and radioactive substances like radium before being promoted for use by the general public and used by industrial workers. The United States government could have prevented stories such as the Radium Girls with the regulation of these products. The scientific community had done enough research to prove radium was a potentially harmful product, as skin burns were detected from its use in 1901, a French chemist died from overexposure in 1905, and blood changes were observed by 1909. This proves that scientists should have been prevalent in providing information on radioactive elements to the government. In addition, the US government should have prevented companies like the United States Radium Corporation from trading with their primary objective of profit over the health of its employees and the use of an unregulated hazardous product. The Radium Girls case brought forward many aspects of radiation and occupational safety and protection and remains a frontrunner in the study of radiobiology. The Radium Girls case shows the lack of substantial knowledge that was needed in the early stages of the atomic age, specifically to the discovery of new radioactive elements and the radiobiologic effects humans will endure without adequate safety measurements and protections in place. Stahini et al. Conducted 2 studies, ending in 1994, on the life-shortening of female dial painters. Study 1 was of those employed pre-1930, and Study 2 was of those employed between 1930 to 1949. In Study 1, 1,301 subjects were examined, with 85 deaths from radium-induced malignancies. In Study 2, 1,242 subjects were examined with no radium-induced malignancies recorded. This evidence shows that being a radium dial painter pre-1930 would be considered a hazardous profession. This also proves that increased radiation safety measures, radiation protection, and widespread medical acknowledgement of complications induced by radioactive materials between 1930 to 1949 had significantly improved. The Radium Girls case brought to light many issues the workers face and brought about national reforms to benefit workers of all professions. The Radium Girls case and various radiation incidents throughout history have created a pathway for the safe practice using radioactive materials and the use of ionizing radiation. Radiation safety and protection is paramount for any industry associated with radiation use. Advancements in technology have made using radiation as safe as possible and, if used correctly, beneficial to the treatment and diagnosis of many health issues. The understanding of radiation biology has been enhanced through past incidents and the ever-growing technology. Thus, the case of the Radium Girls, although tragic, has helped us make the use of ionizing radiation as safe and beneficial to the industries and professions that take advantage of its potential.